Hello, everybody, and welcome to this installment of the Future Grind podcast. I'm your host, Ryan O'Shea, and today we'll be speaking with television host and science communicator James Young. James is best known for his participation in the Phantom Limb project, through which he helped to design and received a custom prosthetic limb in partnership with the Metal Gear Solid video game series. This journey was featured in the BBC documentary Bodyhack, Metal Gear Man. His new show, Can Robots Love Us, recently debuted on BBC Three. We discussed the current state of technologies, including prosthetics and robotics, providing a realistic view of both the potentials and the limitations of this tech. As always, show notes are available on futuregrind.org. We're also on iTunes, YouTube, and Facebook. Make sure to subscribe, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. This is Future Grind. Okay, we're now here with James Young. James, thanks for joining us.
No worries, nice to be here.
So, for some backstory, you were selected to be the recipient of a custom prosthetic arm in promotion of the Metal Gear Solid video game series. This process was the focus of the BBC Three documentary Bodyhack, Metal Gear Man, and you and I first met when we were both invited to speak at Bodyhacking Con in Austin, Texas in 2016, which was essentially the first public reveal of this prosthetic arm. So how did that process start? How did you become the Metal Gear Man?
It was kind of a strange journey, really, because it was completely unexpected. And what happened is that I had this accident that put me in a position where I was attending a clinic for recovery and sort of rehabilitation and prosthetics and stuff. And they happened to have this it was a little brochure on the wall which described the Alternative Limb Project, which is it's this awesome little thing. It's run by Sophie Di Oliviera Barata, and she is basically this awesome artist who creates unique prostheses for people. And the aim is to kind of capture a bit of their personality and put that into whichever limb they're going to be creating. And so I was just kind of surfing the net occasionally, like the net. Do people say the net anymore? Oh dear. Essentially, I was surfing the web and looking up on this site of hers. For some reason, it was saying that they were looking for an amputee video gamer. So I was just completely very confused, kind of why would they need one of those? Because it doesn't seem like there would be many of them, which apparently there are. And that's been part of my journey since then. But it was the company Konami who made the Metal Gear Solid series, and they were basically working with Sophie to promote the new video game, which was MGS5 at the time. So, yeah, just a really strange opportunity. I submitted on this website kind of my ideas behind what I wanted from an arm or what I wanted it to be like. And they kind of hit me up a couple months later and was like, yeah, do you want to meet up for a coffee? And we did, and they just I think they picked me pretty fast because I was just kind of so on the same wavelength as them.
Well, it looks like they've made the right choice, and I would suggest that everyone check out your BBC documentary if they haven't seen it yet. I'll make sure to link it in the show notes at futuregrind.org. But in that documentary, they show your previous prosthetic arm, which consisted of a pincher-type apparatus with a bit of a hook, and that didn't necessarily mimic the shape or function of a human hand. The new prosthesis, however, is in the shape of a hand. So what was that change like? Was there a noteworthy difference in ability?
Yeah, it was a really strange experience just to have something hand-shaped. I think it kind of blew me away, the difference, because obviously I was using this little pincher thing, which is like a body-powered prosthesis. So I shrug my shoulders forwards, kind of, and it uses that mechanical leverage to open the little gripper thing. So that I was using that for some tasks like soldering and doing little electronics things, but otherwise I was kind of getting along with one hand. But it was so strange. It was just really strange. The kind of silhouette of a human hand just completely changed how my brain was thinking about that side of my body. And it was kind of really emotionally impactful somehow. But the arm itself is like an artistic prototype, like I said, through the Alternative Limb Project. So I think a lot of the coverage kind of tried to I guess, fake news, sell it as something that was like the world's most advanced bionic arm because it has a torch in the wrist and a laser and something. So they were kind of selling that title, but people looked at it and thought, that looks so amazing. It must be amazing. But essentially, I could move the hand, open and close the hand. That was it. I could lift the elbow up and down with like a electromechanical lock, but I wasn't really controlling that. Like in day-to-day life, it's not a very functional arm at all. So in that sense, there's not been a change in my life in terms of prosthetics because it was a complete prototype. It was just an artistic prototype. But the exciting thing is the kind of journey that has put me on to further change my life in the future.
Yeah, I think I know where you're getting at, and we'll definitely dive into osseointegration in a bit. But first, I wanted to explore something you said there. You mentioned that while you now have the shape of a human hand on your prosthesis, it didn't necessarily improve your abilities. Realistically, we no longer have to be bound by the shape of the human hand. You could theoretically have any type of limb designed and completely customized for your use. Do you feel that our desire to mimic human biology is a bit misplaced at all, or is that the goal we should have? Is there any other type of prosthesis that you would prefer?
I think it's a really interesting discussion to start because there's kind of two big opposing points. And the initial thing that would be my first response is that obviously the human hand has a bit of a backstory, and it's based on based on it's an evolution of the pentadactyl limb, which is like a form that transcends all different kinds of species and groups of animals. And so it's pretty good, which is the problem. It's a pretty good thing. And as exciting as it would be to maybe have a tentacle, like we don't have tentacles up here on land for a reason, kind of thing. So I think the other way to go about it is thinking, do we need to have that level of complexity? It depends potentially on per person. So if you've got someone that has no arms, I think they would probably want to get involved with having a human hand, like a pentadactyl limb, at least on one side potentially. Because if I don't know, it's such an interesting question because why are we doing it?
That's a great point. We've evolved the limbs we have today because clearly, in the past, the human hand has given us the best chances at survival. But I don't think we should equate the fact that something evolved to be a certain way to necessarily mean that that's the best possible option. For example, humans have evolved to be drawn to high-calorie and sweet foods. This kept our energy up when we were fighting for fruit with other primates, but in the modern world, it leads to diabetes, obesity, and death. So I certainly believe that we can improve on the biology that we've evolved to have, but at the same time, the world around us was designed for people who have upper extremities in the shape of a human hand. Our tools, our doorknobs, our steering wheels and buttons, they're all designed for human fingers. So if we go the route of customizing limbs, whether we want tentacles or more digits or different joints, that could create interesting design challenges. How do we make sure that our public places are accessible and welcoming to a mass diversity of abilities? Is that even a realistic goal to pursue? So yeah, it's certainly an interesting conversation.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's an incredible problem to have. And I think what's kind of driven the focus on chasing a human hand is just because it's kind of a bit unrivaled. And so engineers specifically, they've always had this kind of obsession with reaching that level of complexity and having it in a portable package, because we kind of see it in robotics where people create these really much more biomimetic and natural moving hands, but then they have these huge bases that need to operate kind of strings and tendons and stuff for them to happen, to be able to move. And so getting that into a portable package for amputees has kind of been a little bit of an afterthought in my view, because what we end up with is 5 basic motors, maybe at a push, and just pulling down on fingers. There's no kind of in some research hands, you've got some I'm not even sure what you'd call it, the technical term, but being able to kind of spread your fingers and split your fingers apart in a horizontal plane as well. But that level of complexity just adds so much weight. I think it's the struggle, and people really like that challenge of trying to reach that level of complexity.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone likes a good challenge, and when you think of the movements of human fingers, whether it's flexion and extension or abduction and adduction, you have multiple dimensions of movement that increase complexity. And you have a very interesting perspective on this. You have experience with normally functioning biological limbs, and you also have experience with both prosthetic arms and also legs. Based on your broad range of experience, do you feel that one type of prosthetic limb is more advanced than the other?
Yeah, it's a weird one because you think hands would you think hands need more work? It's a weird one because what would you think as from the outset?
Well, I would say that they are two very different engineering problems. Human hands require the ability for precision. There are a lot of nerve endings for tactile sensation. You need to be able to finely adjust your strength of grip to avoid crushing an object, but you also need to hold it tight enough to avoid dropping it. For the lower limbs, you need to deal with balance and the shifting of weight. Your movement drastically changes depending on if you're walking or running, and you have to deal with stairs and slopes. So, yeah, I'd say they're very different challenges, and I guess I just wasn't sure if you had any perspective on one being more adequately solved than the other.
That completely makes sense, and it matches reality because with legs, from my experience, I've chosen to have pretty much just a big carbon spring on the end of my left leg. So I'm kind of cheating because I'm offsetting the issues of balance and bypassing having an ankle and toes to kind of finely control my balance by just kind of outsourcing that to my brain and my balance center. So I'm using the rest of my body and kind of overworking my right calf muscle, my right ankle to stay upright. And even people who have two missing legs and have the same thing, it's just kind of it has an extra cognitive burden, which I think people don't realize how much of an effort it is to kind of just be aware of your surroundings and what you're on and just kind of just friction and traction to things. So it is something we can do in a really basic way, just to put something on the end of it and stand on it, just like you can if you wear a big pair of stilts or you go on a pogo stick. You kind of get used to that. But you're right, the hands need a lot more input, I think. And it's something, like I said, with the engineers, they're really excited to work on it. So, but the other thing is to consider is that I think it's something like 1 in 9 amputations is going to be a hand and the rest are feet. So in terms of making money from it, you can't make as much money from hands because there just are fewer of them. So that's been a really annoying kind of barrier to technology proceeding in that regard, because feet kind of, there's a big market for it, which is really annoying because I'd love to see hands get better.
Wow, that's really interesting. I never knew that the statistics were so one-sided there, with that many more leg amputations, but I guess it makes sense. You and I have a mutual friend, Angel Jafria, who our audience might recognize from her appearance as the Archer in Netflix's White Rabbit project, or in her acting roles in films such as The Hunger Games. I had a conversation with Angel in which she mentioned that she has a couple of different prostheses for different purposes. One for exercise and physical activity, one for general use. Do you have a similar experience? Do you have prostheses for different uses?
I kind of do. I hang around at home on a different on a limb that attaches differently to one that I would go out on, just because they have different strengths. The one that I'm wearing right now, just sat on the sofa, attaches by having a silicon liner, but it has a metal pin sticking out the end of it, and that pin kind of ratchets into the inside of a prosthetic leg and kind of clicks in. But for me, that's not really comfortable for walking on, because you have all of the weight of the prosthetic foot kind of dangling off this one little pin tugging on the end of your leg. So it's really not comfortable. But having just this pin, I don't know if this is really boring.
No, it's fascinating.
It allows you to cut down around the socket part of the prosthesis, because you don't need to kind of support it as much. You don't need to have so much suction. So with my other prosthetic leg, I have another layer over the outside of this carbon socket that basically runs up to my thigh, and that creates kind of a vacuum seal. The air is kind of excluded as I push my leg into the socket, and then I roll up this another layer. So it's kind of, I guess it's kind of like a flange. I don't know if that's a word that people use often. And it kind of just lets the air be excluded, and it's kind of sucks onto my leg. So, and it has no pin, but that means I can kind of barely bend my leg because there's so many layers of rubber, but it makes it comfortable, and it makes it very I guess it's just really sucked on, so I can kind of like prance after a bus without my legs just tugging. It's kind of all, it feels really attached to me, as much as it can be by layers and layers of rubber. But we can talk about osseointegration later, which is like the ultimate solution to getting rid of all these problems. Because, yeah, you can't really have one thing that works for everything. And that's the main problem, especially with me. I only have these two because one is kind of technically a spare. The NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, wants to give you just one leg that works for everything, that does just about stuff that you want to do. And it's a massive compromise the whole time, and it sucks.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate that the health service feels that one prosthesis would be adequate given their current limitations. Do you feel that that's largely due to cost? There has been a lot of hype about the potential for 3D printing to greatly bring down the costs of prosthetic limbs, while also enabling customization like never before. Is that hype justified, and why is that not yet making an impact?
I think to say that 3D printing offers that now, I feel is upsettingly, like saddeningly, it's not completely true because there's a lot of work, there's a lot of design work, and a lot of probably personal skills that you need to develop to be able to maintain your 3D printed hand if you did go down that route. It's technically possible to do, but they are kind of fragile. They're not made of the most durable materials. And so that's one of the main problems with 3D printed prosthetics at the moment is that you with a commercial hand, you buy the hand. They up they basically they require that you have a service contract for a number of years afterwards for however many thousands of dollars or whatever. Um, and that just it means kind of like if you smash your phone screen, you just put your phone in the post, or you put your bionic hand in the post, and they send you back alone a bionic hand until you finish your they repair your other one. So with a 3D printed hand, you could just be out there and you break the motor, or you kind of break a tendon in it or something, and you've got to reprint the whole bottom half of your hand and go home and attach it and stuff. And if you're not skilled, and also if you don't have two hands, it can be quite difficult.
That makes complete sense. There's a lot of human talent and skill that needs to go into developing this technology, and I think we all have high hopes for 3D printing, but we need to be realistic about the current capabilities and the work still needed to be done. But while we're on the subject of 3D printing, I do know that you have used 3D printed parts to augment the capabilities of your prosthetic arm, including printing a GoPro mount to be able to attach a camera directly to your limb. You also had a built-in laser and flashlight, a slot for a smartwatch, and even the ability to attach a quadcopter drone to the arm. Have you found that any of these additions are particularly useful, and were they your ideas or were they included as part of the video game promotion?
I would say that none of the things that were decided upon, apart from the drone, were anything to do with the company
Mhm.
that paid for it. So essentially, I chose them all. So they are all genuine demands that I put down on the project. So yeah, I don't know if that's really embarrassing or not, but I did really want loads of LED lights in there, and I had a Pebble smartwatch in the wrist, and yeah, I 3D printed the GoPro thing myself just to kind of explore different uses for the arm.
Is there anything else in addition to the GoPro mount that you experimented with including on the arm after it was created?
You know what? I pretty soon ran into the drawback of wearing the arm because it is heavy
Hmm.
and it doesn't attach the way, for example, our friend Angel's arm does. Hers just slips over her lower forearm, and I'm missing so much of my left arm that I basically have to wear this thing like a big cup over my shoulder and then strap it on with a bunch of straps, and it's quite a piece of kit. And I I think as much as the features could be good and lights are useful, and even I had a torch in the wrist that I did use when I was wearing it to like get around at night, which sounds really like it might be untrue, but I did use it. I
Hmm.
feel like those features would genuinely be useful if the arm was more user friendly and I had a reason to wear it. Because essentially, the burden of wearing the arm was too great for the features, however good they were, to be something. I just didn't put it on.
This sounds like a great point to get into the topic that we've been alluding to for a while now. Are these issues ones that could be addressed with osseointegration? Would that help distribute the weight to your skeletal system and better support prosthetic limbs?
Yeah, so osseointegration essentially is when you find a bone that's had an amputation on it, and basically you open it up and you have to kind of core out the inside of the bone just to make room for a metal implant that kind of gets, it literally does get hammered up into the bone, inside the bone. And sometimes you cross brace it with some screws to kind of hold it in. Um, and basically, it's a metal implant that's made of titanium with kind of, there's different technologies on how to kind of integrate the titanium with the bone, but titanium itself, as I'm sure some of the listeners know, is a biocompatible metal. So the bone cells can lay down fresh material and actually bind to the titanium, which is incredibly handy. um, and that means that depending on the technology, you can have kind of a skin integration potentially where your skin kind of also gets sewn into the upper side, like the distal end of the implant, to create like a good seal. Some technologies try to just let the metal pole, the implant, stick out through the skin and just use kind of bactericidal materials and stuff or whatever to stop any kind of infections getting through the skin. So there's kind of a lot of risks with it at the moment, and I feel like the technology is still maturing, but people find it so good to have these bone implants that kind of extend the skeleton from bone to metal and then outside of the body. They find it so useful and so much more of a relief to use their prosthetics with that technology that they just wave the hand at the infection risk. They're just like, it's worth it because it's attached through my skeleton. It doesn't weigh anything anymore because it's just loaded the natural way. Whereas for my limbs that I wear now, they're just kind of attached to my skin on the outside of my body. So they're just pushing and rubbing and pulling on the skin and the sweat and they slip off. And it just feels like such an old school way of doing things. Like, why are we doing that anymore? So osseointegration is something that I'm pursuing with a massive passion.
Are you pursuing osseointegration for both your arm and your leg, or do you feel that it's better suited for one over the other?
It's an interesting question because I am pursuing it for both, but my priority is with my upper limb at the moment because there's kind of no way that I can have a functional bionic arm without using an implant because the socket technology, it's just not compatible with my level of amputation, essentially. You can have something on there, but it completely limits you. And to try and get electrodes, for example, that want to pick up the signals to control a bionic arm, as well as a socket, which I'm kind of trying to move around and I get sweaty inside. It doesn't work. And it works for other people with different amputation levels. But for me, I'm kind of stuck unless I save up money and get this implant. I'm essentially not going to have anything on my left side of my body. And so that's kind of a massive worry because my right shoulder is kind of damaged as well. So there's limitations into what I can do with my right arm that's left. So there's that priority, I think. With the leg, I'm essentially using a socket and I really don't like it and it sucks. But in terms of priorities, like I can get up, I can take steps, I can walk. So that's already way more than I can do with my arm. So it's kind of the second stage thing that I'm seeking for the leg.
You had previously launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise awareness of and funds for your osseointegration project. Is that campaign still live, and are you still seeking funds for this?
Yeah, I'm still seeking fundraising because the implant technology and stuff is not offered on my health service, and that really sucks. And also, I've kind of not fully explained recently on the fundraising site, which is like a GoFundMe page, that I'm actually also now talking to people about having implanted electrodes as well as just the bone implant. So that's kind of the goal, is to internalize the system of picking up the neural signals or the intent to control a hand and elbow and stuff like that from the inside under the skin, so that I kind of remove all of the troublesome problem aspects, and just essentially the goal is to just bolt it on in the morning, and that would kind of, hopefully the connector is included in the kind of the way that the prosthetic limb attaches. So I'm just attaching the arm and it would provide power to the electrodes or whatever that's on the inside of my body. And that's it. It would be on, it would be powered, I'd have the control signals, there'd be no sweat. It would just be amazing. And it's being done, but the thing that I'm experiencing at the moment is a little bit of anxiety about what I should be jumping in and getting, because it's also new that I feel like, what if I get a really bad thing? What if I get something that's going to be kind of completely limited in a couple of years and I could have waited and I might have had something that kind of gives extra sensory feedback up into the implant from the bionic hand. So maybe it has like touch sensors and that could kind of feed back into my body internally. There's like a number of options. And also, what can I afford? It's a strange situation where it's like I need to think of the most sane long-term plan, because the health service here would probably have to try and support whatever I choose. And if I choose something that they don't condone, then I'm a bit screwed. They might just whip it all out and say, like, I mean, if I had an infection or a problem, they'd probably just, the first thing they do, take everything out. And that's however many thousands, tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff just gone. So it's really sketchy.
That's true. It's a bit of a risk to go for osseointegration now, with the potential for more advancements in the future. I also know that if the team at Grindhouse Wetware and some of the other biohackers out there have anything to say about it, you'll have plenty of additional options for augmentation.
That's true.
But I'll make sure to link to that GoFundMe campaign in the show notes so that anyone who wants to donate, learn more, or follow along with your journey will be able to. You really got my interest there when you mentioned implanted electrodes monitoring activity in the nervous system, because that's something that I see a lot of broad potential for, and something we've been working to experiment with in the lab. Do you know if these electrodes would be using the same nerves that were damaged in the accident that used to control the arm and hand, or would that be mapped elsewhere, similar to the current technique of using the back and shoulder muscles to control the arm?
There are a number of ways to do it, and it really kind of, again, annoyingly depends on the compatibility for me at the moment, because when you talk about commercial bionic arms, they kind of, in the same way that maybe Apple and Microsoft and Samsung don't play very nicely together, there are different technologies that don't play very nicely together. So even if it was better for me to, for example, get a nerve cuff electrode system that kind of went higher up above the muscles and picked up signals of intent actually on the nerves, then maybe I would limit myself in some way, because maybe that kind of electrode is more fragile and maybe could not dislodge, but probably just degrade over time more rapidly than if I went for something that was like an EMG electrode that was internalized, because they're kind of more robust essentially, because they just don't need to pick up such fine signals. They use the muscles actually tensing rather than the nerve signals that are trying to cause muscles to activate. So there's just too many options, and I don't know what to do.
Well, I'm actually very glad that we're getting into the problems and limitations of the current technology. I feel that in society, and particularly in some techno-optimist circles, prosthetic limbs are romanticized. There are futurists, perhaps myself included, that see advanced prostheses as a potential replacement for normally functioning biological limbs. Some people even have an interest in removing their biological limbs now in favor of a prosthetic alternative. What's your reaction to this? Do you feel that this is justified in any way?
Boy. I feel like it is a romanticism, as you say, because we in this community have been excited by science fiction, I guess, that has existed for hundreds of years. And so it feels like we're kind of at the cusp of something where, oh my God, this technology is happening. Things are being put in people. They're controlling things with their mind now. I don't know. It's like a seed into our imagination to think that stuff from fiction is coming into reality, when in fact, I don't know what a good analogy is. We're so far away from having kind of, for example, an artificial general intelligence, but it's kind of the people that would get excited about having a Google Home in their house and talking to it. I feel like that's the kind of level we're at. Like it's so basic what you can do with a prosthetic arm. It's so basic. It's so limited. It's kind of very binary. It's just something or nothing. You get to close the hand, open the hand, turn the hand. Maybe you can do a couple of those things at once if you have a really complex system and you've trained yourself for 2 years to do it. It's not something that just they just slap it on, they just cut you up and put it on, and it just works like a movie. It's not there. It's just such baby steps, and it's the problem that people experience in the biohacking community, because essentially all of this stuff could have been done by now probably, but it's just the risk that, for example, like biopharma and medical companies, they don't want to get involved in cutting people up and putting stuff in them because it's too risky. It's just not worth the hassle, and it's not like a moneymaker until it's proven to be safe and effective. But it can't be safe and effective until it's researched and done. It's all that problem. It hurts everybody the whole time. It's annoying.
Exactly. And do you foresee, are you confident that you'll see a point within the next couple of decades in which prosthetic limbs will advance to the point that they may, at least in some specific circumstances, be better than biological limbs? I think a good example might be Oscar Pistorius, who competed in the Olympics with the Blade Runner legs. He competed at a top level with prosthetic limbs. Do you think there will be a point in which perhaps able-bodied humans with biological limbs cannot compete at a high level as high as people with prosthetic limbs can?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I can argue that absolutely that can happen is because the brutal truth of it is that, for example, if you had someone with two missing legs and you put wheels on them and then they'd accelerate to 35 miles an hour or something, like, there you go. Their abilities are beyond a human, but it's so brutal in its approach that it doesn't really count. And that's the thing that we're experiencing when we talked about just now with prosthetic legs. Like, you can't have one that does everything. So you can have one that creates a huge spring that propels Oscar Pistorius way faster than anybody else. But can he then get on the metro and go home with those on? No, probably he can, but it's going to suck.
Yeah, it would. And I think your analogy with AI was a great one. We have AI systems that beat the best humans in the world at Go or Texas Hold'em, but they are not generalized intelligences. It's the same with prosthetic limbs. Create a prosthetic arm with a blade for a hand, and you can now cut apples better than any human hand can, but it's probably not the best option for playing with your dog. So yeah, we don't yet seem to have the generalized prostheses that match human capabilities in all regards, even though they may exceed them in some. On that subject, have you noticed any improvements or benefits that you get from your prosthetic limbs? Perhaps that they don't necessarily feel pain and can enable you to do things that would be uncomfortable for a biological limb?
I guess there are little token things that occasionally get drawn into my attention, I guess. It tends to be just kicking stuff really hard. Or like if I have a can and I'm going to put in the recycling, I just like stamp on it with my flat carbon blade and it's just completely flat without any pain.
That's not where I expected the answer to go. I didn't know if you would have an answer, but I love that one. And honestly, it got me thinking of things just like stubbing my toe. Stubbing my toe is horrible, but I imagine you could hit your carbon fiber limb off of things and not feel anything, at least at that part of the limb. You might feel it where it attaches.
Yeah. I mean, that's weirdly enough is an annoying benefit of having crappy rubberized and not very well attached sockets, like the cups that go over your leg to attach them. Like, because it's not attached to you as much, there's less of a connection. And so, for example, if I had an osseointegrated implant in my lower leg and a carbon blade and I kick something, maybe I'll crack my bone open.
Yeah.
Because there's metal in my bone.
It's a real risk.
The force would just go up in there. So yeah, and it's an example comes to mind where I'm not sure. I think it was Oscar Pistorius was saying that he was wearing his legs walking through traffic and he melted his legs on a car exhaust pipe when he was trying to cross the road.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can say that having no pain is a good thing, but it'd be nice to have some sort of sense to tell that something bad is going on as well.
Exactly. I think that's the whole point of pain, is to let us know to get out of those situations. And if he was just standing there melting his leg, maybe a little bit of pain or some kind of signal would have been beneficial.
For sure.
Switching topics a bit here, since your participation in the Phantom Limb Project, you've really grown into a role as a science communicator. Through your media appearances and your public talks that you've given, you've had the opportunity to share your passion for technology with others. Is this an interest that has always existed for you, or does your fascination with science and technology stem from your recent interactions with it?
I don't know. I definitely grew up completely in love with science, and it was kind of the one thing that really turned my brain on growing up. So that was something that I always pursued, and I kind of pretty much was almost going towards cybernetics and computer science for my university degree, but I don't know why. My parents thought it would be more sensible if I kind of got a more general degree so I could get a general job. So I ended up doing just straight biological sciences, which was fun, which was nice. And I spent most of my time there actually just organizing with a friend and starting up the university's first science magazine. So we had that to do as well. So it was kind of, I guess, science communication has been something that I'm always passionate about because there's such a disconnect between research scientists, for example, and the media, and even their kind of people that help them do the press releases in science communication. They don't really understand what's going on, and the messages get confused and mixed up, and it's an annoying realm, I think. I think we need more people. Like if you think of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who just completely bridged uh, astrophysics, I guess, and the general public, and just trying to make it cool and make science really much more attractive by giving people that level of enthusiasm that kind of makes them realize how damn cool it is because it is, and people don't get told enough.
And as a visible science communicator, you're exposing people who may be unaware of the current state of technology to what we're now able to do. Have you had any interactions with people who perhaps see your talks and are inspired to learn more?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that does happen. And I guess weirdly enough, it kind of happens more on Twitter. I get the messages from people just saying, "Oh, I didn't realize this is what we were doing now. I didn't realize that we could do this. This is really cool." So I guess in that regard, it's just the simple fact of kind of being public with stuff is kind of heartwarming because you get to have a little impact. And an unforeseen impact for me was actually kind of getting messages from amputees as well, because they would say like, "Thanks for being out there with your crazy bionic arm," because I kind of was a bit afraid of going out, or I didn't like mine, and now I think it's kind of cool. I like to think where we're going with all this science and technology. So some things can be really nice.
Yes, I'm fully in support of that visibility, and it's great to hear that your story is in some ways helping those who are in similar situations. But your work extends far beyond exposing people to advanced prostheses. In your new BBC Three show, Can Robots Love Us?, you take the audience on a journey of multiple different situations in which humans interacting with technology can impact us in the future, and how those technologies, often in a very rudimentary way, are being developed and used today. It's a realistic and perhaps slightly skeptical look at the future of tech, and I think that's important. You explored the potential future of robots assisting the elderly, of virtual reality and chatbot assisted therapy, and even of artificially intelligent sex dolls. So, is there anything you experienced during filming that you feel has a lot of potential to actually impact society and make a difference in the near term?
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of, I guess a scientist will look at it and say it's a really small sample size, but we had this patient who was experiencing claustrophobia, which is a fear of being trapped in anything, essentially. And so she was limited in her life by just kind of driving in her own car with this huge sunroof. So she kind of would only go in that car. She wouldn't ever get public transport. She's afraid of lifts, elevators, and tunnels. And even just entering a new building, she found difficult because she just was scared about whether she can get out, where are the exits and stuff. So we had this virtual reality headset which she would wear, and she was guided through this virtual environment with a therapist there. Um, and it kind of, because it's virtual reality, it kind of gives you more control over exposing someone to the things they're afraid of, and you can kind of adjust the parameters and create a more intense or less intense feeling for them and support them through the experience. And it was incredible because she went through this experience just completely not knowing what to expect after 2.5 years after this kind of major incident that caused her to feel this claustrophobia. And at the end of it, she'd kind of realized that because it was a virtual environment. She had that kind of backup of being able to just whip off the display off her head and get back into the real world, that she coped with it. And it kind of gave her a little trigger where she thought, oh my God, like, what if I can bring this to the real world and apply this, just transpose this virtual reality into the real world? And what we saw was that after absorbing what had happened, she then left that virtual reality therapy session in the elevator. And it was incredible just watching her face change, how she kind of just realized that it didn't have to be, her life didn't have to be that way anymore. She didn't have to plan to get somewhere like an hour early because of traffic and stuff, because London's awful for traffic. Um, and it just completely changed. It's completely changing her life. She's been on underground tube trains and stuff since then, and it's like it's still a journey, but that was that was literally a result I saw in front of my own eyes, and I thought, if she's tried everything, she's tried all these different therapists, the different kind of cognitive behavioral tools and stuff, and only this virtual reality therapy worked.
That was a very impactful segment. The idea of immersive virtual reality enabling people to experience various circumstances and overcome fears is definitely worth further exploration, and it seems to have helped in this particular situation.
Mm.
And that was an example of one of the many uses of virtual reality. But much of the rest of the show dealt with actual physical robots, which are able to move in and interact with the physical world. This is something we often see in science fiction, with robot assistants and a robot workforce. Do you see this future coming into reality anytime soon?
Um, I think what we kind of revealed in the show is that the future that we're in right now, again, like people trying to chop their arms off and get a replacement robotic limb, it's not quite what we want it to be. And so some of the technology that is there kind of still needs an element of human control or intervention, because it kind of doesn't have enough intelligence or situational awareness to be able to adjust to things. And so I feel like the technology, like the stuff we show, it has a lot of complexity, but it's limited. It is limited in what it can do for somebody. And you can, yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I feel like we kind of, what I talk about on the show is that we kind of spring these robots on people, and people make these assistant helper robots, and they say, oh, this could help the sick, this could help the injured, or it could help the elderly or the disabled. And it's kind of like, but why do they have to have it? Why is it's if it's not good enough for an able-bodied person, how is it going to be good enough for them? Like, why do they have to have this kind of crappy robot? And it's kind of a really sad fact that we're doing that, but it's because I think we have this aging population, for example, and we have in the UK at least, we have social problems to do with not enough carers and stuff, and people that can assist people in need. And so it's kind of like we're battling between people trying to improve those services using human beings, and then people thinking, oh, maybe we can offset some of this human burden on human beings by using technology. And it's kind of, yeah, it's a really difficult position that we're in at the moment.
It is difficult, and in addition to that being the theme of your show, it's also, I think, become the theme of this podcast episode. I think I'm often guilty of portraying the future in a purely optimistic way, but in reality, it's going to take a lot of people dedicating themselves to the very difficult and often frustrating labor of building the technology that results in the future we want. It's not going to happen on its own, and it's certainly not here yet. So I appreciate you spreading that message. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with the audience, or any final thoughts?
I think, yeah, it's that's such an interesting thing to say, because there's peaks and troughs in hope and expectation in terms of what technology will suddenly do for us. And that's definitely something that's affected, for example, artificial intelligence and the funding behind it. You can kind of look through like coverage and literature to see how projects to do with AI have spiked and fallen through the years, because people suddenly think, oh, it's now. We're finally here. We're going to have something that can think for itself and solve our problems without us kind of having any input. And that, I feel like that's a real danger, especially with AI, but I think with any technology, when people get so pumped about something and then realize that oh, it actually kind of sucks and we're still 20 years away, it can kind of screw up funding and affect what happens in terms of the development of the technology. So I think it's really sad, and especially because of kind of our media coverage that we have to do these days and the kind of clickbait that goes behind that. I feel like there's a big risk with it. But I guess the one thing that I'd probably say is that through this journey, I've been really excited in trying to engage with young people in terms of getting them interested in science and technology. I'm basically working with the BBC still to try and engage a younger audience that isn't just male as well. And so with the next program, we're trying to focus on what's relevant to young women, essentially, because there is still a massive gap in terms of gender. There's a gender gap. There's obviously a spectrum of gender, but in Silicon Valley, for example, I think you're going to find a hard time finding anyone that would say that there's enough representation of different genders in tech. And I feel like it's really important to get young people, especially girls, interested in science. So if there's anything that you guys take away, is to just be aware of trying to, I don't know, make things, just open it up to women's issues, essentially, because stuff like, for example, that's covered in the show, we've got sex robots in there, and people are responding really quite strongly to that in terms of their reactions and thinking, holy crap, where is the world going to go if suddenly this kind of male-driven tech society brings in sex robots, and what does that mean for people's psychology and how they behave with other human beings? And I feel like it's a really interesting debate, but I don't know. I'm mixing my answers up right now, so maybe I'll just stop talking.
No, I think that was a great answer, and you hit on a couple of very important topics. We'd certainly like to avoid another AI winter in which enthusiasm and funding dries up, and other technologies such as robotics, cybernetics, and virtual and augmented reality are also at risk of falling victim to an unjustified hype that actually hurts them in the long run. We need to be careful about how we frame these conversations, and sensationalistic clickbait media is certainly not helping. Your new BBC program sounds great, and I'm in favor of anything we can do to promote interest in science and technology for everyone, regardless of age or gender. Let me know when there are more updates to share on that front, and I'll make sure to support your efforts here and on my social media channels. Speaking of social media, I'll make sure to put yours in the show notes so that our listeners can reach out and follow along with your adventures. And thanks again for being a part of the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for chasing me up as well, because that's really kind of you, because I've been really busy and I got distracted. Oh, Alexa's piping up there. Thanks for having me. Sorry I'm a mess.
Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea again, and thanks for listening to our interview with James Young. Make sure to check out the show notes on futuregrind.org and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. We're available on iTunes, YouTube, and Facebook, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. We hope to see you next time on Future Grind.